afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Season 3, Episode 8 of our Association Leadership Series, officially the longest title of any of our webinars we've had. Legislative Update and Inspection and Board Responsibility for Maintenance and Inspections. My name is Craig Vaughn. I'm the Chief Financial Officer and one of the founders of Castle. I want to welcome back Jeff Rembaum and Michael Bender, but before I do that, a special welcome to Mr. Chuck Rembaum, who's listening in, I understand today. So welcome, Senior Mr. Rembaum. We appreciate you checking in for us today. Guys, I think everybody knows you by now. Welcome back. But how about a quick introduction? And Jeff, since you're your dad's listening, let's have you give us a little story about KBR.
Sure, I love when you change the script up at the last second on us, but that's good.
You can wing this one.
Oh, I think I can. K. Bender Rembaum, you all know us and know us well. We represent community associations in and around the state of Florida. Last count was somewhere north of 1,400 or so. We're 20 lawyers with a big surprise announcement coming, maybe 21 lawyers in the very near future. Just under 50 total staff, offices in Palm Beach Gardens, our main office where Michael is in Pompano, an office in Tampa, and Miami-Dade by appointment. We have all sorts of educational opportunities for you all that are tuning in today. If you receive either Rembaum's Roundup or you receive the firm's email blasts, you know all about them, from board certification classes to why amending and bringing your documents into the 22nd century is important. Topics on reserves, topics on construction projects, topics on fair housing, you name it. My partner, Robert Kay, hosts a monthly radio show on the first Thursday of the month. My other partner, Mr. Mullengarden, Peter Mullengarden, every Monday morning does a radio show that covers the St. Lucie Stewart area. Michael is extremely involved with CAI and legislation affecting community associations. We're going to hear a lot from Michael in a few minutes. And I think that's enough of an introduction for today. And I'll also put a shout out in there. So hi, Dad. Thanks for watching.
Good stuff. Michael, anything to add?
kbrlegal.com. You can get everything Jeff just talked about. You can go right to our website. And if you're looking for us for assistance with your association, info@kbrlegal.com. And Mr. Rembaum, it's nice to have you here.
Good stuff. Well, welcome, guys. I want to remind everybody listening today that Jeff and Michael are not intending to provide specific advice for your association, just giving their opinions on the items that are on the agenda. I also want to remind everybody you can chat in your questions. We got a whole bunch of questions when you register. I'm going to try and work some of those in, especially the ones, there are some off topic that we probably won't get to, but I think we're going to address during the webinar today, most of the concepts that you submitted. So let's jump in. We're going to use polling lightly today. Marinez, if you could post a poll question number 1, let's see who's listening in today. While we do that, I just want to kind of take you through today's agenda. We're going to talk about the recently ended legislative session. Michael's going to give us an update. We're going to go and revisit the current regulations regarding inspections. We're going to talk about reserves, things we've talked about in the past, but they're front and center right now. So we're going to go revisit the rules around reserves. We're going to talk about Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, who have changed some questionnaires they're submitting, which has some impact on associations. And then if we have time at the end, we will get to Q&A. Marinez, can you post the results of question number 1? Let's see who's in the audience today.
Greg, are we still talking about tree legislation?
We are going to talk about tree legislation, yes, as a bonus feature in the webinar today. So we are going to address that as well.
518.
So we have about 2/3 condos, 1/3 HOAs, and a couple of co-ops. So again, welcome everybody. Let's jump in, guys. We had high hopes for the legislative session, I think. Michael, I'd have to say lunch bag letdown. What happened?
What happened? Okay, so I guess what we'll do is we'll focus first. Well, let me just offer a general statement that in Tallahassee, there's about round numbers, about 3,000 bills that are offered every year. And I think about 10% of them might pass, somewhere around the nature of 300. And when I say pass, I mean the House and the Senate finally agree on a language that mirrors each other for it to then go up to the governor. It gets sent to the governor, and the governor has 15 days either to veto it, sign it, And if he does nothing after the 15 days, it becomes law on its own. So the first step, of course, is the bill goes through bill committees in the House and in the Senate, and they have to ultimately mirror language that mirrors each other. And so sometimes when you hear that a bill failed, I don't want the listeners shouldn't think, oh, that means it's a negative. I'm going to first talk about the main issue, the condo safety legislation, which unfortunately did fail. But then I'm going to highlight a couple of bills that failed, which I think we should all be applauding. So starting with the big one, though, the condo safety legislation. Here's, obviously June 24th of 2021, Champlain Tower, South Falls, horrific event. And immediately thereafter, there's discussions about how this is going to need to be addressed legislatively. And a balance was immediately determined that the balance between ensuring this never happens again, the safety of residents being paramount, versus making sure there's not an overreaction. And CAI, Community Associations Institute, that Craig had mentioned earlier, that we're very active with. 3 task force groups are created, one to address maintenance and building inspections, one to address the funding issue, reserves and the financials, and third on insurance and risk management. The Florida Bar had a task force, Broward County had a task force, Miami-Dade had a task force, and they all worked on trying to get guidance and information to Tallahassee so that the House and Senate could craft bills that would at least address as best as possible the issues that need to be addressed regarding condo safety. In particular. And so the Senate went first, and the Senate Bill 1702 was proposed, and it only addressed maintenance items in building inspections. They called them milestone inspections. And if let me just step to a side for a second, as everybody may already be aware, as of today, and even going to the session, the only 2 counties in the state of Florida that have building certification programs are Miami-Dade and Broward. And the rest of the state does not. Jeff's going to hit on a few things later where some cities have jumped in to address this lack of. But so for purposes of what I'm talking about, Broward, Miami-Dade, the only ones with certification programs. So 1702 is trying to put forth a statewide certification program, 30-year recertification for all buildings. That's your milestone inspection. Then every 10 years thereafter, if you're within 3 miles of the coast, you'll be 20 years and as your milestone. And then every 7 years, it'll be a visual inspection first. By qualified licensed engineers. If they see no issues, you're good to go. If they see any issues, that's when they'll have a more intrusive inspection. The proposals obviously got into more detail on those inspections, which I'm not going to do for purposes of this discussion, but it would be a more intrusive inspection. The other item they addressed, which we all can agree on, is the need for transparency. And it's something I know as a firm, Jeff and I and all of our team members emphasize this to our clients all the time. Craig, I know you and Castle do the same. The importance of transparency between the board and management and the membership. And in this case, the transparency is referring to the status of the building. I heard it. I'll say I heard a statistic. I'm not going to give it an adjective. That within, and I may be off again on the numbers, so don't quote me on this, but within 30 days prior to the collapse of the building, there were somewhere in the nature of 20 or so sales and leases of units in that building, and questions were coming up as to what did these new buyers or new renters, what did they know or didn't know about the conditions of the building and the reserve lack of funds and et cetera. And so that's another thing that this bill wants to address is transparency. And the way they did this is they said the engineering report that's going to be put together will need to be mailed to all members as well as the building officials, and any prospective buyer who wants it is entitled to it. I will point out that, again, this is a relatively positive bill, certainly steps in a positive direction. One way where the flaw, our group comes in on your behalf, and I say on your behalf because all of our behalves, is think about a 100-unit condo. And these engineering reports are like 100 pages with a lot of diagrams and language that, for myself, I don't know that I'd even understand everything, and the concern you'd misread it or misinterpret it and take it a different way. But a 100-unit condo having to mail out 100 reports where 90 of the 100 people aren't even going to look at it. Now go to a 500 or 1,000-unit condo. So we did discuss with them the idea of, hey, have the engineer create a summary of recommendations from that report. And that summary is what would need to be sent to everybody. And they did revise the bill and they agreed with that. So we'd have a summary of recommendations that would be mailed to all members. The actual report would be put on the website and would obviously and sent to the building official, and obviously available if anyone wanted a copy, they could request a copy. It did not address reserves in any way, though. No reserves were addressed in 1702. So jump slightly forward to Senate Bill 1742, reserves only is what was addressed. And another more stats for you guys. 11 states require reserve studies in the country. Florida is not currently one of them. And I know we're going to talk more about reserve studies. 9 states require reserves. Florida does, but we are the only one, or one of 2, that allows for full waiving of reserves. And that's going to be, as you'll see, that's going to be the big issue that ultimately, little spoiler alert, that's what ended up killing this whole bill. Majority of the quorum is what's now needed to waive reserves. Majority quorum, which could be a very small number. So the Senate bill proposed we'd change that to majority of all owners, they ultimately combined this bill with their 1702 so that everything would be in one proposal to send over to the House. And the reserve portion would not take effect, I believe, before 2023 or even 2024, kind of phase it in. And they also were going to they were going to keep pooling of reserves being permitted. Interestingly, someone gave a statistic that 67% of condominium associations in Florida use pooling, which I thought was surprisingly high to me. But anyway, so that's the Senate. Now, the House, the initial position that, again, this is information provided to me. I'm not telling you this is my position. I'm saying this is what I was told. The initial position in the House generally seemed to be this tragic event, while tragic, is a one-off, and we're not going to have to do it. We're not going to do anything right now with legislative to respond to it. And then immediately pressure was put on them, and they came up with a bill in early February. It only took them 13 days to pass this bill. And just so you're aware, 60-day session, it's very, very unusual for bills to get through committees and get passed to the floor and be passed. 13 days. And as a result, it appears the bill was poorly thought out. It included reserve studies in with the building inspections for the engineers to undertake. It was called a 10-year building integrity reserve study. And a word that I've learned from our lobbyist, Travis Morris, conflate. It was conflating concepts, basically joining 2 concepts that really shouldn't be joined, because basically it was joining the engineer's inspection with the reserve study.
Hey, Mike, I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Where did the word conflate come from? And didn't it used to be confused up until about 6 months ago? That people were confused and now they're conflated.
I don't know.
I don't know.
But I will tell you where it came from me. It was not my word of the day. I got it from, I give Travis more of that shout out. But I do like the word. And I think it perfectly applies here, because what they're, for everyone who's aware of reserve studies are a document that you would use, a report that you would use to ascertain how much financially you need to reserve each year. It's financially based. And there are reserve study, there are very qualified, certified reserve study advisors in the state that help prepare these things. While there may be some qualified engineers, the engineers conducting building inspections, structure and electrical and things of that nature. And it's to combine those 2 in the way that the House bill did. It was confusing, and quite frankly, the other thing is, the engineer, there's only a certain number of labor hours engineers will have, and there's an enormous push for engineering now with everything else going on. They also said no waiving of reserves, flat out no waiving, and no pooling of reserves. And I do think it's important to understand that the Senate chose the senator that the Senate chose to chair this bill and lead this bill is a senator who has 0 condos in her community. 0. And that was intentional. They really wanted her to, there's no special interest, no involvement. It was intentional. The House, to me, a 180. They chose a representative out of Miami. Obviously, and his position, as I understand it, and the reason he was balking at the Senate bill was we've been doing building inspections already, and it clearly wasn't enough. We need to address reserves. We need reserves in place, and we need them now. So the negotiations commenced. Senate went up to 2/3. on the reserve issue, and the House said no. And by the way, on the inspection issue, I think the Senate bill had something about, they talked about 25 years maybe instead of 30. That didn't seem to be that was workable. That was no, and everyone was pretty much on the same page, somewhere between 25 and 30-year milestone inspection. And if you're on the shore, it'd be shorter. It was the reserves that killed it, Craig. That was it. So the Senate went to 2/3, House said no. And the Senate said, hey, we need to do gradual reserves to get to the point when full reserves, that we have to do it in a measured way. Now, remember, I said the House had passed their bill. So it was up to the Senate hadn't passed their bill yet. They had just negotiated. They basically were working on the terms because they try to get the bills to match before they pass them. Senate already passed it. So it was up to the Senate. The House had already passed it. So it was up to the Senate to match the bill or come back with a proposal. And the House continued to reject Senate proposals. So here's what I learned. Based on House and Senate rules, on the last day of session, which we are now at the last day of session in my story, it can only go back to the House with one final proposal. And then the House can either accept it or reject it with a proposal change. And then the Senate can either accept or reject. So the senator said, listen, we can't, reserves is clearly something we're not going to be able to agree on it this quickly. Let's at least get the maintenance bill done. We all agree pretty much on that. Let's get that done. And she had the Senate bill sent back to the House with just the maintenance portion, building inspections. And the House said, nope, it doesn't do anything because inspections are already being done in Miami-Dade. And so they rejected it. They didn't reject it with a modification. They just rejected it. And as a result, it was dead. Session end. So that ultimately is what ended the session, what ended that bill. There was just an inability to negotiate or unwillingness to negotiate on the reserves. Not unwillingness. Yeah, I guess a little bit of unwillingness to negotiate on reserves, but also just why, and that I can't answer. To me, it's very short-sighted and a little bit self-absorbed to say, hey, we have inspections, so we're not going to pass a statewide inspection program for the rest of the state. I don't understand that, and I don't, like I said, I can't understand why there's a different mindset in the House and the Senate, but that is what put us where we are today without a condo safety legislation in place for statewide. To answer questions about a special session, a special session on condo safety legislation appears very unlikely, certainly not going to likely happen before November elections. And the reason for that is because special sessions, in order to have them, House and Senate leadership want to know that there is basically a meeting of the minds that they're going to be able to reach before they expend additional funds to call everybody up and do this special session. So there will not be one likely on this particular item.
Michael, that's a great summary, and I didn't get to vote in the legislature, but I would have voted for the Senate version. I think move it forward, right? Like move it forward. But Jeff, what would you have voted?
I think it's important. I would have voted to get to a meeting of the minds because it's clear that the legislators really don't understand the inner workings of reserves, pooling reserves, what the minimum threshold levels are, and how it actually works. You can't have a proposal where within 3 years, an association that's never reserved would have to be fully funded. And they don't even understand the term fully funded. Fully funded really refers to a particular year, not the entire balance that we have $100,000 for the new component that we need in 10 years. So we're looking at, so there's some just basic definitional issues that I think they were just, you use the same word and you get two different definitions, kind of like the word conflate. Mike, while you were explaining that, I went and looked it up, and it actually means merging two ideas together. But it also means, according to another source, confusing two ideas. So you have two different.
And I think they both apply in this situation.
There you go.
But I think, Craig, just to clarify, you would have agreed to take the Senate's final version, which is, hey, let's just at least agree on inspections and maintenance. And I think, Jeff, you certainly would as well. Absolutely. I think almost everyone would have. And again, we're not up there dealing with the politics of it, but I think at some point it's like, hey, let's get a small win. Let's get this in place. And I guess I can only surmise that the thought process was, if I agree to that, I lose my leverage, which is, quite frankly, you're leveraging with people's lives. Maybe that's a little dramatic, but that's my point. So that's the story there, Craig. I did quickly want to just follow up with the two things that failed that were good.
Yeah, please.
Okay. So there was a couple of other pieces of legislation that impact community associations that did fail, which we should be pleased about. The first item has to do with construction defect, and Chapter 558 of the Florida Statutes, which was put in place, gosh, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago already. It's basically an alternative dispute resolution type program, which quite frankly has been very successful in resolving construction defect disputes. Quite often you hear 558 with a turnover process when a new developer turns it over, but really it applies to any construction defect related matter. But the idea here is a bill sponsored by the home builders and that group was looking to create what I'll call impractical and possibly and certainly impossible in some situation obstacles for community association claimants and maybe individual claimants that in some cases eliminated the opportunity to address legitimate defect issues at all. Very quick example, Statute of Repose, which for purposes of discussion, considered a very hard and fast statute of limitations, which was 15 years, a few years back, reduced to 10 more recently. They wanted to further reduce it to 4 in some instances or 7. And as some of you may know, and I'm going to share it with everybody, developers may hold communities for up to 7 years before turnover under certain situations. So under their proposal, if a developer had the community for 7 years and then turned it over, statute of repose kicking in, there's no claim. It was mind-boggling. And to look at the bottom line of these home builders, it doesn't look like they're hurting much, with what's going on here. So it really did not make sense to just about everybody else as to why this was going on. And there was a lot of pushback from FLA, from the other groups who support community associations. And we did get the ears of the right people in Tallahassee. And we did get them to make modifications to that bill, so much so that the home builders who proposed the bill killed it themselves because they said this is not going to work. If this passes, it's not going to be good for us. So that bill got killed, and that was a big relief because that would have been very, very, very bad for associations and quite frankly, anyone who has a construction defect.
Mike, before you go to the next one,
yes,
I just wanted, for our listeners out there, I just wanted to clarify the statute of repose, as Mike said and alluded to, it is a hard deadline. So you could have 4 years or 5 years to bring your claim from the time you first discovered it. That's the statute of limitations. But if that statute of limitations goes beyond that 10-year period, let's say you discovered it in year 8, well, you have that 10-year statute of repose. It's going to cut you off those 2 years. And I know some of you out there probably had questions on that. So that's how the statute of repose and statute of limitations work together.
Thank you. That was excellent. That was not a conflation at all. That was really well said. No, thank you. Yeah. And by the way, for those of you listening, I'm going to apologize now because I just was hearing myself and I feel like I'm So I know we have a lot to get to, and I was trying to knock this out. So I'm going to try to take a breath and talk a little slower on this next one. It is short, but I want to make sure people are hearing what I'm saying.
It's all good.
So
all good.
the second bill that I want to just quickly mention has to do with the HOAs in particular. And the idea here is, as everyone in the condo world knows and in the industry knows, there's an ombudsman for condominiums, and there's a $4 per door charge for the condo, the co-op, the timeshare, and that money's supposed to be for education and enforcement, and it seems to be pretty much just for enforcement these days.
Where does it really go, Mike? What do they do with that $4 per door? What is
that's another webinar. But they wanted to. The proposal was to create a similar type oversight for HOAs, but with no funding mechanism. It was unclear where they would fund it from, other than from the money they were taking already in through the $4 per door for condos and co-ops and timeshares. That in itself was troubling, to say the least. Also, another proposal was right now there's a clear fining statute for HOAs where the board determines a fine. And then it has to go, in order for the fine to be imposed, though, it has to go to an independent fining committee of 3 owners who are not directors, officers, or employees or family members of those. And when I talked to other people, I said, "Oh, I'm sure." And I know all your communities out there have volunteers just chomping at the bit to be on these fining committees, right? It's so easy to get them. They're lined up. But obviously not. It's usually a challenge to get those 3. Well, this proposal, for whatever, well, I can tell you what I think the reason is, would then add a second layer, like an appellate court, to the fining committee of 5 separate homeowners separate from those 3, who you could appeal. If the fining committee approves your fine, you get to appeal it to this next level. I mean, to me, that was asinine, quite frankly.
We can't find volunteers now for the 3, let alone the 5.
Well, right. Well, that to me is, not to mention, you don't need another level. And I believe and I may be wrong, but I believe this is the kind of thing that comes on when an owner or two in a community, maybe they're friends with a representative who proposed this bill, or some connection there. I don't know, but they were fined. They didn't like it. Maybe they were fined multiple times because they won't follow the rules and they don't like it. And so they wanted to have some level of appeal. And they said, hey, we should get this in. And someone proposed it. Thankfully, again, through the Florida Legislative Alliance and some other groups, we fought back. We got that killed. So that's two bills that failed where we should be very, very pleased. Unlike the condo safety legislation, those are two that failed that we should be pleased. So that's kind of a summary. There is one bill that, Jeff, you're going to touch upon that did pass. It's not yet with the governor. And Jeff, I'm going to kick it over to him, Craig, because I think we need to talk about that.
I would ask our listeners, this is an important one and you can help us here. So, but Jeff, take us through SB 518.
I sure will. Before I do, the condominium $4 a door, nothing stops the legislature from raiding that money. And in fact, every single year they take between 50 and 85% of that $4 fee and put it into the general welfare fund to use for other purposes. So if you wonder why the division of condominium is constantly underfunded, it is exactly that reason. They don't use the money for what they said they were going to for the intended purpose. You can talk to your legislature about that. You can
year in and year out, Jeff, it's a great point. Year in, year out, we try to get them to pass something that will preclude them from doing that anymore.
That would be great.
And you can see how successful we've been.
Well, that would be great. Maybe we need to bring it to the condo committee too. That would be a nice thing. If you go to kbrlegal.com, you can snake your way over to Rembaum's Association Roundup. You'll find about 280 articles or so I've written in there. A couple of them actually address this in fine detail. So if you want more information, go to kbrlegal.com, go to Rembaum's Association Roundup. There's a search bar. You can just type in door probably and pull up the article that way. Okay, let's get over to 518. This is a bad bill for associations. Last year, we had some tremendous relief from the legislature, and it said this: a local government may not require notice, application, approval, permit, fee, or mitigation for the pruning, trimming, or removal of a tree on residential property if that property owner possesses documentation from an arborist or Florida landscape architect that the tree poses a danger to persons or property. Well, that's being changed, that definition, ever so slightly. They did add this year, and this isn't so bad: a tree poses an unacceptable risk if removal is the only means of practically mitigating its risk below moderate as determined by the tree assessment procedures. But here's where the legislature and the sponsor of this bill, to put it in plain English, is screwing over homeowner associations, condominium associations. They've redefined what residential property is. Wouldn't you think the common area of your HOA is also residential property? I know the property appraiser does. You don't get a tax bill at the HOA or condo for common element. You don't get a tax bill for a common area. If you do, talk to your lawyer. You shouldn't be. It's supposed to be absorbed into whatever the ad valorem assessments are for the individual owners. So common area is residential property. However, not anymore, because now what the legislature is doing is they're redefining the term for the purpose of this bill to exclude common areas. Residential property means a single-family detached building located on a lot that is actively used for single-family residential purposes. So they have completely removed common area, common element from the advantages of taking advantage of this bill. You know who's really upset about it? The arborists and those folks in local government that are responsible for basically the trees. How many trees are you supposed to have on your plat? In Palm Beach Gardens, they call it the forester. That's their official title. There's different titles in different jurisdictions, but that's the gist of it. And they just got all upset at last year's bill. And from what I understand, they're the ones that proposed these changes. I know K-Bender Rembaum, probably Castle. I know Rembaum's Association Roundup. We've all sent blasts out urging you to tell the governor, vote no and veto this bill. You can easily find it, a way to, if you need it. Maybe, Craig, we can repost it after the show.
If I may, it was a call to action that came initially from CAI's national organization to everyone here in Florida, and it basically is really the the impetus for this from the parties you named are absolutely perfectly correct, Jeff. They were claiming an overabundance of fraudulent activity, that people just using the new legislation to remove trees, just because they didn't like them. And they had 2 points of the bill that they used to address that fraudulent activity, which were no objection. We have a real problem in our HOAs with these oak trees, and the damn foresters don't let you pull the oak trees. And if you do, they make you put them back if you pull the old one. It's absolutely asinine and ridiculous and antiquated. We need HOAs to be able to pull their trees out that are lifting sidewalks, that are lifting the driveway. Well, you can do that right now. Do that now and do it before July 1st, just in case this bill passes. Yeah, because under the current bill, if you could, as long as an arborist comes in, and the key, one of the things they want to see is they want that arborist or landscape architect to be on site and actually see the actual tree and the damage. That's great. I have no objection to that at all. And they also clarify what damage means and those things. Again, no objection. It's just, as Jeff pointed out, the failure to include common area, common element as residential community. And it also is impacting the insurance requirements for associations, because these insurance carriers are not willing to issue liability coverages to HOAs who have maintenance obligations for the sidewalks when these issues are constantly coming up. And then the association has to spend inordinate amounts of sums and go through all this red tape to get a tree removed. And their policy is going to expire in a week. There's real life examples of these things.
It's really overregulation, and we're going to put up the link that you can go to and vote against it. We highly recommend that. That's our position as well.
Hey, Craig, talk about overregulation. How about a homeowner association ombudsman?
Yeah.
The only thing I did want to add, though, by the way, to everyone should be aware, if your community documents do have requirements for landscaping, that is not something that this statute allows you to ignore. You'd still have to follow it, but obviously you wouldn't plant your tree near a sidewalk or the way the developer might have done it, 20, 30 years ago when it wasn't an issue and now it's exposed. So just be aware that you can follow up with your council as far as that part.
Right. It's just dealing with government regulation, not association regulation.
Right. Okay, guys. Well, listen, Michael, great summary. I think the reason we wanted to share with our audience kind of the Senate and the House bill was likely this is going to be revisited next year. Probably it's going to fall somewhere in the middle if a normal negotiation happens. So there's going to be a requirement to do inspections, and there's going to be requirements, something around reserves for sure. So just to give you the perspective. So as board members, you're aware as you make decisions, some of which we're going to talk about next. So let's move on. Jeff, I think, notwithstanding the fact that the legislature didn't deal with this inspection issues, there are rules in place. Specifically, Miami-Dade and Broward counties have inspection rules.
Correct.
And then Boca Raton just passed some guidelines. So before we get to you, we'll let Michael take a breath. Ness, can you post poll question number 2? And we'll see, when was the last time you had an engineering report for your building or community? And while we get those results, Jeff, can you remind us what the current guidelines are in Miami-Dade and Broward, and then touch on the new requirements of Boca?
I sure will. We'll also talk about Highland Beach because there is another one.
Agreed.
So there's actually 4 in play. We have 2 county and 2 city. So let's talk about that. We have Miami-Dade and Broward that basically mirror each other. Miami-Dade's requirements came about in the 1970s, and I think Broward came about in 2005. Let's talk about the purpose before we go into the requirement, right? There's 2 purposes. One is to make sure that you want to make sure the building is structurally safe and electrically safe. So the purpose of these reports is to identify major critical structural deficiencies needed to make the building structurally safe, and the same goes with electrical. Identify major critical electrical deficiencies, and then what you need to do to make the building electrically safe. So that's the high points of what these reports cover. Then when it comes to Broward and Miami-Dade, the first inspection is at 40 years and then every 10 years thereafter. It's not a requirement to bring your building up to code. That does not come into the equation. It's dealing with structurally safe and engineering and electrically safe. So bear that in mind. Then when we get into Boca Raton and Highland Beach, it's a little bit different. And they even bring in a new word called a threshold building. So that's in theirs. But basically, just think of these as residential structures that it's going to apply to any building greater than 3 stories or 50 feet in height. All right. And that exceeds 5,000 square feet. So there's little nuances. I was reading from Boca Raton right there. There's little nuances. But when it comes to the recertification for Boca Raton, it starts at 30 years and then every 10 years thereafter. And in Highland Beach, the recertification starts at 25 years. But if the building is older than 40 years already on the first inspection, well, then after you do that, it's every 7 years. And guys, if you ask me, where the legislature really did the biggest disservice to the state of Florida was taking out a required reserve study, because those reserve studies really hit on a lot of these components and what the remaining useful life of them was. It wasn't an engineering study, it wasn't an electrical study, but it still, in a left-handed way, lets you know the condition of the building, because it lets you know what the useful life of your components were. So if you put these studies together with a required reserve study, if the legislature could get their arms wrapped around that, that would be a great thing.
Yeah, I think the other disservice is the fact that we have cities going off because the state didn't do anything. So we're about to see all of these different pieces that we have to pull together. Right. There are a number of questions submitted regarding Palm Beach County, and Palm Beach County has not acted at this point, right?
Not the county, but Boca Raton is in Palm Beach County. Yeah. Highland Beach is in Palm Beach County. So you can see there is a trend. Yeah. I did hear a while back that Palm Beach County at the commission level was working on something. And I had seen some reports, but I haven't seen anything probably in 3 months on that. So I'm not sure what the status is.
There's a quick question that just came in, I think is relevant. With if I did my 50-year certification, you know, I'm in Miami-Dade or Broward.
40, and then they did a 10.
And then they did 10, and now, but they did it late. They did it at 55 years. Do I still need a 60, or do I wait 10 years from my 55? What do you thoughts?
You need to go back and to your lawyer on that one and dig into the ordinance itself. I have 2 answers that come to mind, but I don't like guessing, so I want to know the answer.
Okay, fair enough. Good point. And with respect, guys, with respect to no legislation on the inspections, what do you recommend for your clients if they're asking you to amend their documents to require inspections? What would you say?
Oh, that would be great. I would love a client to ask us to amend their governing documents to require inspections because they want to make sure their future boards carry on their activities.
We're going to talk more about that.
That would be great. You know, but very few boards actually want to hamstring themselves in that regard because they're talking about spending money. And what's the one thing they don't want to do is obligate themselves to spend money.
Yeah. Well, you know, one of the things we view here at Castle is, you know, your building engineer, your engineer is a partner, a key strategic partner for the association. Yeah. So engage them early. The best time to ask for them to inspect is when nothing's wrong, but they'll start to get a feel for your building. And so, you know, 10 years and you're doing one at turnover. If you're a new condo or new HOA, you're going to have an engineering report. Build on that. Do that every 10 years, whatever you need to do is kind of.
And I think something that everyone needs to take away, and we'll probably repeat this a few times, is just because this legislation, just because Tallahassee couldn't have a meeting of the minds, doesn't mean that you as an organization, you as board members and interested owners should not be moving forward with the understanding, hey, if nothing else, let's make what happened a wake-up call. And be proactive, not reactive, be proactive with getting inspections done if they haven't been done. And we'll talk about, you know, as far as, you know, and getting maintenance, staying up to date with maintenance. And of course, we're going to get more into reserves. And I know one of the gentlemen, Alan will answer that question. So that's really what I think is important. Proactive, not reactive.
Yeah, agreed. So let's before we get into the kind of maintenance side and the responsibilities as a board member, Jeff, you're going to talk on. Marinez, will you post the results of our inspection or our inspection question? So guys, 50% of the people who know have done an inspection within the last 5 years. So that's good. I think that's a good sign. And again, with having an engineer as your strategic partner is a good thing. You can see.
Craig, can you put that list back?
What?
Post that list, put the list back up. All right, all of you. Sorry to interrupt real quick, but this is alarming to me. 17% of you have never had an engineering report for your building?
Yeah, that's what I saw too. I was like, what?
Yeah, do yourselves a favor. If you know it's never been done, please go back to your board and talk about this and get it on the schedule. Okay, that's enough of that.
It's a great point. And I think, again, with respect to engineers, you can see the demand that's coming down the pike on engineering time. So if you have a partner, that's a good thing, because it's not going to be a brand new call. You're not going to go through that process. And I can tell you, they're going to be selective. We've seen some of that already.
And it's going to be.
And just Jeff, just to piggyback off what you said, there was another certain percentage that doesn't know.
Right.
You should know.
25.
Find out. If you take nothing away from this, go find out.
I agree.
Great.
Okay, well, let's just jump into, we have mostly board members on the webinar. So the legislature did nothing. Jeff, what responsibilities does the board have regarding maintenance and building inspections and these types of things?
Exercise your fiduciary duty. Schedule the inspection. Schedule the reserve study. Don't be afraid of special assessments. If God forbid the building needs a multi-million-dollar repair, you shouldn't turn a blind eye to it. You shouldn't recall the board because of it, right? Champlain Towers, what happened when they got their initial engineering report? So that board started to look into it. There was talk about this big, huge special assessment. What happened? Next thing you know, they're not in office anymore. And then nothing happened for a period of years. And then they started to attack the problems when they got worse. And sadly, the eventual collapse occurred, which is just horrible. But that was completely avoidable. There could be board member liability. We didn't really see it with Champlain, but I imagine all the carriers tendered, if you will, in that one. So you might not actually see the claims, but really your personal pocketbook could be at issue as a board member if you do not properly exercise your fiduciary duties. We don't really have case law on that yet in Florida. I just don't want anybody listening to be the ones that are involved in its creation because they find themselves sued because of some catastrophic problem at the building that wasn't properly disclosed. So we got to really educate, and we need to address these issues head on.
Jeff, there are some comments that came in specifically with respect to how do I, protect the association? What can I do as a board? We had a kind of discussion the other day about what tools are available in their toolkit to protect themselves. What can a board do?
Well, as a board member, you can certainly have your own umbrella policy on the backside to cover your board service. So long, it's not going to cover if you do a criminal act. It's not going to cover probably a reckless, when something rises to just pure recklessness, but it probably would cover negligence, silly mistakes, stupid mistakes, absent-minded mistakes. That issue really piggybacks into what is the fiduciary duty of a board member? Well, you are caring for the property when you're a board member. You have lots of other daily activities, but one of the very important ones is caring for the building, caring for the property, and making sure maintenance is carried out. If you're ignoring those duties by saying, no, I don't want to spend $5,000 on and I'm making up a number, I have no idea what it costs, on an engineering or on a reserve study. Reserve studies are probably less. And we don't want to know what's buried under the carpet, so to speak. Look, you can't see anything wrong with our building. Why should we spend the money? Well, you know what? These kind of problems are not the problems you as a board member are going to see. What you're going to see is what happened in Champlain when the problems are unaddressed. You might see the beginnings of a problem, but you won't be able to see the depth of the problem. That's what the engineer is for. They're trained to know how to look at them and to know when something is more catastrophic versus a simple maintenance issue. So the best advice is have a reserve study, have an engineering study, even if you don't live in Miami-Dade or Broward. Obviously, if you know your building is 25 plus years old, it's time to start thinking about having a good look at the building. I'm turning 59 soon.
Wow.
I know, right? Time for me to start going to the doctor a little more often, maybe, right? For my, I do my annual checkups and such. Why do we go to the doctor for our annual checkups? Well, we don't want to find something out that's catastrophic and not wake up tomorrow morning when they could have done a simple stent procedure. Well, what are we doing for our buildings? What are we doing for our neighbors? Shouldn't we treat them with the same type of humanity that we treat ourselves?
Jeff, I think it's a good point.
It is. And I guess I just, I want, these questions are popping up as well. And I just want to, further clarify the point, if I may, Jeff, the point Jeff is making isn't to scare you board members off. He's basically just trying to say, which is a more detailed way of saying what I said, be proactive. Go get these, go out and retain experts to assist you in running your condominium. You're not going to be exposed to liability if you're meeting your fiduciary duty. A mistake is a mistake. That's not what anybody's talking about. And there's a lot of protections for board members in place in your governing documents, as well as in the statutes, as far as indemnification and things of that nature. The point really that we want to emphasize here is the state that Tallahassee couldn't figure it out, but that doesn't mean that you haven't figured it out. That, and that's the point that we at Castle and KBR are trying to make, is go out and get an engineering proposal in place, have it reviewed by your attorney, get an engineer in place, get an inspection done, proactively address your maintenance items, your management team, get a strong management team to assist you with that. Look at your reserves. And one of the things that we'll talk about is, especially in the condo world, statutory reserves require the board to fully fund in the budget. And I know we're running short on time, so I want to make sure we hit this. So, but they have to fully fund in the budget. And the issue that we have is the board thinks, oh, well, I got to pose the question, does the membership want to waive these? Because you've done it for decades. You're a new board, and hey, the proposed budget would be mailed out along with the proxy. Do you want to waive reserves? And that's just the way it's always been done. But the fact is, the law says the board has the authority, the board has the requirement to adopt fully funded reserves in their budget. And if you as a board believe that's in our best interest, you need not do anything else but propose a budget with fully funded reserves. Legally, you're in good shape. Politically, maybe not. But that isn't really the point. The point is, you don't need to put the question to waive reserves. If you want to, we have a few communities who've done this, and they started doing this, quite frankly, to their credit, a year or two before the collapse last year, where they said, hey, you know what, we're going to start implementing 5% or 10%. And so what they did was they put out their budget and they said to the membership, okay, we're going to fully fund, or we're going to partially fund it this much. Which would you prefer? There is no waiver option. If there's no waiver option, you're not waiving reserves, and you're starting to put funds away for a rainy day.
Right. And Mike, to your point, you're going to need some money. You will have the ability to special assess later, but you don't want to bear the full brunt of it. You want to have some money in the savings account. Operating an association is a business. Just like anything else, your widget, so to speak, is the assessment regime. But running an association, before the declaration is ever recorded, a corporate entity is created. You are running a business. Some of these businesses have $6, $10, $12, $15 million budgets. Exercise your fiduciary duty. Do what Mike is telling you to do. You don't need to waive every year. You can partially fund with the vote of the members.
I do want to get a little more into reserves. I want to post poll question number 3 about reserves, and while you're answering that, just to reiterate the issue with respect to inspections. The legislature didn't step in, but I think the general message is it's do what's right, and it's right to inspect. It's right to be informed. It's right to be proactive. And by the way, cheaper in the long run. Everybody we talk to says the preventive maintenance repair bill is way cheaper than the complete replacement at the end of the day. So,
and you know what else is a good point, Craig, that we should remind, we keep saying the board has the authority and the discretion and the fiduciary duty, but remember, board members are wearing the same, they can turn their hat sideways and they put it here, and now they're an owner.
Yep.
And you live in that building. Of course you want to know the place you're living, your family members, your loved ones, your friends and neighbors live is safe. So even just, call it even self-interest, but go ahead, whatever you got to use, but go ahead and be proactive.
Right. So guys, we talked about a little bit of reserves generally. Michael, just quickly, or Jeff, quickly, the legal requirements. You talked about adopting a budget with full reserves. You talked about that's a requirement. You talked about the option to waive or fund fully or partially fund reserves. Am I missing anything else from us?
I mean, generally speaking, and we've gone over this before. Oh, and by the way, I just quickly want to point out, because I've left this out, the proposed legislation for condo safety inspections, 3 stories or higher is what is currently proposed. So I know that was one of the questions. I do know in Broward, Miami-Dade, and Jeff, you might have said this, that it's also has a square footage, and that's the reason why certain buildings, like the building I'm in, is 1 story, but we had to have a 40-year recert, and HOA common facilities might have to have the recert in Broward and Miami-Dade. So I think that answers a couple of quick questions that I've failed to, but yes. Condominiums are statutory. HOA is only statutory reserves if the membership votes to make them statutory, which seems very unlikely. So focusing on the condominium, you have paving, painting, roofing, as well as any deferred maintenance over 10,000. Some examples: a cooling tower, elevator, maybe your pool, and And then the law says, as I mentioned, you're adopting a budget with fully funded reserves. That's the board discretion. If they want to do anything less than fully funding, they need a majority of the quorum of the members to vote to approve it. That's your summary.
Okay, Marinez, will you post the results? Because I think they're interesting. So 3-part question. Does your association rely on a reserve study to determine required reserve funding? A lot do, more than half do, 60%. I think we would hope more, right? This is an opportunity again to be informed. When was the last time you had a reserve study done? Within 2 years, 2 to 5 years. So 90 of 130. So we're kind of 70%. Again, same amount. And
Can I shame the nevers? Can we shame the nevers?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, I do want to say, because a couple of people also pointed out, we are focused, this really focuses more on the condo. I know HOAs do reserve studies, but some HOAs may really only have like the clubhouse and they don't need a reserve study. They just need estimates and proposals. So we have to give that, there's a little bit of that in here.
Due consideration.
I agree. Good news is most of our associations are fully funded or partially funding reserves. So that's
outstanding.
That's a very positive thing. There are a number of questions about timeliness of reserve studies, how often you should do them. Our recommendation at Castle is every 3 years. I think that was previously in the statute before it got taken out of the statute. But
theoretically, and I agree, in a perfect world, 3 years, but it may be 5 years. It really depends on how often your components are needing the work and how often you're needing to dip into the reserves. For example, if you had your reserve study and you're good to go and you're running for 8 years, but you've never had to tap into the money, but you have the money set aside. Once you start tapping into that reserve, for sure, it's time for a new reserve study, Yeah, I would. And I was to say, guys, it's, the prices, probably the majority are between $2,500 and $5,000 to have a reserve study done. It's typically half of that to update it every 3 years. So you don't have to have a new one. Right.
You're just updating it, which is an update. And this is about part of making these people your partners in terms of the managing of your association. Okay, so let's go on to the last thing. And this has got some huge implications for associations, and it's Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac questionnaires. We've had a ton of pushback from banks. But Jeff, before we get to that, Ness, can you post poll question number 4? And then Jeff, can you just take us through the questionnaires and how an association might respond to these?
Absolutely. I'm just looking at the question. Okay.
Maybe share some of the questions, Jeff.
Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, what do? They're not loaning money to anybody. They're buying the mortgages from the lenders that are making the loans to the owners purchasing the condominium units. Well, Fannie Mae has really done a disservice upside down and all around, because their new requirement at Fannie Mae is they're not going to buy the loan if the loan is made to an owner, but that building, that condominium, is not reserving at least, get this, you ready for this, guys? Think of your budget. You need to be putting into reserves, according to Fannie Mae, to be Fannie Mae eligible, 10%. So if your budget is $2 million, minimally, they would expect you to be putting $200,000 into the reserves. There are, I will say there's a limited exception, but for all practical purposes, there is no exception to this. They are running a hard line, especially for new projects. Hard line, 10% of the budget. If not, then you're not Fannie Mae eligible. So for those associations that aren't putting 10% of your budget into reserves, what's the point of filling out and taking your time and energy? What's the point of filling out the questionnaire from Fannie Mae in the first place? There probably isn't any, because it's not going to get you anywhere. The bottom line with these reports are you have to be candid and you have to be honest, and there's no guessing involved whatsoever. Zero guessing. You start guessing, there's really limited liability for filling these out, unless all of a sudden you're guessing at the answers or you're putting patently incorrect information. There's litigation disclosures required. How many of you know the total number of units sold or closed or under contract to investors? Who the heck knows at the association board whether or not the unit is under contract to an investor owner? It's unlikely you probably know that in advance. You find out after they take title and they start having a tenant in there, right? When was the last building inspection by a licensed architect, engineer, or building inspector? Did the inspection have any findings related to safety, soundness, structural integrity, habitability of the project's building? Are there HOA cooperative corporation aware of any deficiencies related to the safety and soundness? Does the project have a funding plan for deferred maintenance? Has the HOA had a reserve study completed in the last 3 years? What is your total reserve account balances? Are there any current special assessments? Are there special assessments planned? And can we have your first son? All of those are required under this questionnaire. Are there planned assessments not disclosed to the owners yet? Oh, yeah, sure.
That's interesting. That last one, I see this Chuck Rembaum said absolutely.
Yeah, that's right. You can have my first.
I assume you're the first one.
No way is he giving me away. He's stuck with me. That's for sure. But these Fannie Mae disclosures, if Freddie Mac is a little more lenient, they're not requiring the 10%. Interestingly, of all the questionnaires I've received and questions I've received from clients, I haven't received one Freddie Mac inquiry. Everything has been Fannie Mae. So that tells me Fannie Mae is doing most of the underwriting, most of the purchasing of these residential mortgages in the state. This could have a tremendous impact. Go ahead and include what's happening in the marketplace, include what's happening with inflation, include what's happening with increase in mortgage rates. And now all of a sudden you can't go to a traditional lender. You're going to have to go to third-party lenders that aren't concerned about Fannie Mae buying their loans.
Guys,
so it's going to get interesting.
Jeff, thank you. And I think the issue.
Wait, Craig, we got to, before he's got to finalize that, the saying basically, I think Jeff overall, and Jeff was emphasizing this, unless you have definitive answers, you should not be answering this questionnaire. That's really what we're saying.
No guessing. I thought I covered that pretty good.
So I just want to summarize. Don't answer the questionnaire. Just don't answer. I think you expose the association to more liability. Is it inconvenient to the prospective purchaser, someone trying to refinance? Yes, but that's far outweighed by the liability exposure to your association. So the recommendation is not to fill it out. And you should definitely communicate with your association counsel before doing so.
And some of the liability, right? The liability questions. What is the liability for not filling it out? As my dad said at the breakfast table, it's the United States of America. Anybody can sue anybody for anything. Okay, fine. That aside, am I concerned that a prospective purchaser is going to sue the association because they couldn't get a loan because you didn't fill out the Fannie Mae questionnaire? Because that's the liability question at the end of the day. I am not concerned about that. I don't think that kind of a case has much merit.
Agreed.
Whatsoever. But
I agree.
There's currently no legal obligation to fill it out, and that's why you don't.
And by the way, that's the position we've taken as well. And, there's some factual questions. Did you have a reserve study done? That's the subjective questions around, is my community habitable? Like there's some real general things. So I want you to post, by the way, quickly on the 10% with respect to reserve, Jeff, it's 10% of the budget before reserves. So if you have a $2 million operating budget, you're required to have 200 grand in reserves.
Into the reserve figure.
Does not include reserves, right?
Circular calculation. I'd like you to post the results, Namarinez, if you don't mind, because yes, 12% of people are responding. I would get some real legal advice around that. No is a number, but the I don't know is what scares me here, because I can probably guarantee you your manager or somebody is filling these out, and you're exposing yourselves to tons of liability if this is happening. You should be hearing about it in your community. If you're not, I would get involved in this particular situation.
Typically, they show up, Craig, if Joe Schmo is purchasing a unit and has a potential loan and there's not a questionnaire on file with Fannie Mae, then that lender may just send it directly to the manager.
Which is happening, I think, more than we care to admit. Guys, we're done. I did want to post the link to the 518 if we can. Here's where you can find it. Please go on and respond. It's also in the PowerPoint. It's in the PowerPoint. You'll see the link. Jeff, Michael, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for your guidance and advice. Michael, great job on the legislature. Get them to move faster next year. You can go to
Skillet with you next year.
You can go to KBR's website or Castle, www.castlegroup.com and get that voting information. So everybody, thanks for listening, guys. Thanks. Always a pleasure.
Thank you.
Mr. Rembaum, thanks for listening in. We'll look forward to hearing from you next time. Take care, guys.
Thanks. Have a good one.
Everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.